think that, because again, in the US, there's often a lot of times to just stay domestic for most of your career. Do you think that having that opportunity to go international, especially early, is something that can really create kind of a launch pad for someone? Or where's your lie on that?
So I'm probably about the most biased person you can ask just because I lived overseas for 10 years. But the simple answer is yes. I mean, I think when you're living in a place where you're in the minority, you don't speak the language, you don't know the culture, you don't really understand and know the context, that is a really great environment to learn how to deal with ambiguity, how to deal with paradox, how to build resilience, how to build empathy, all of these things that are really, really critical in terms of not even just saying being successful in business, but I would even kind of say just being successful in life. And as much as there is a skeleton key to acquiring and leveraging those kinds of traits, man, at least my experience was living overseas. That was that skeleton key for me in terms of becoming a very different leader than I think I would have otherwise been. And I'm a bit of an anomaly because the truth is, the job I'm in now is the first time in my career I've ever supported a U.S. business. So every other job I've had has been a corporate job, an international job, or a based overseas job. But I think a large reason I'm effective in the role I have today is because I had those experiences, and because I had those experiences early on. And I think that's another thing people mistake is if you wait till the time you're some, senior executive, you can go live in another country, but you're never going to be able to get or grasp the reality because you're just too far removed from it. So doing that early on, where you kind of have to have your hands dirty, I would really encourage that. And for me, what I would say is, and I don't mean to overstate this, but it's quite literally changed my life. And I owe a big debt of gratitude to PepsiCo for that. But I think I've been a real beneficiary of having those kinds of experiences.
You talked about three things, I think, which is energy, optimism, and are you proud to come to work at the company? And I was wondering, is that something that a student, when they're looking at a potential future employer, that's really what they should be? I mean, obviously you have to earn a salary, but is that really kind of some of the drivers that you really should be looking for and focused on as that first job?
So the simple answer is yes. The longer answer is I'm not sure. And what I mean by that is everybody should want and work for a place where they ascribe to the values that are espoused by that company. Everybody should want to work in and should work in a place that gives them energy, that gives them pride, etc. The reason I say it's more complicated than that is if you're putting the onus on the purpose of kind of your life, of your organization and the things that are valuable for you, say, well, the company needs to provide that purpose, there's a lot of people that are going to be very disappointed for a long time. So kind of the way I look at it is whatever your core purpose is, you can almost certainly find that, maybe not in any organization, but in any large organization. So you certainly have to align with the values of that company. And it's a little bit of that same mindset and mentality. And where I see people really struggle is when they're expecting the company to provide all of that for them, and they just kind of get to sit back and be critical of, well, it's not this, it's not that. It's like, well, you have agency in this too. And like, there's things you can do and apply to that. So I think it's kind of keeping that balance right. That is really important, because especially for students coming out of school these days, the reality is there is no perfect company. There is no perfect organization. My experience is all companies are inherently dysfunctional. It's kind of just a question of where that dysfunction actually sits. What do you value the most?
I saw somewhere that you actually, speaking of like for students in general, looking at different employers, you mentioned that it's there's three parts. I'm blanking on the third part, so I apologize. But it was people led, and tech enabled, and then there was a third part, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. So I was wondering if maybe, again, for students looking at that, oftentimes they think of Walmart as a retailer, but there is, I think you've been growing like double or triple almost every year on e-commerce. So even the technology side and the opportunities available to students from the STEM fields is pretty vast, I would assume.
I think you're right as well in terms of if I kind of look at that from a skills point of view. I mean, it's an interesting, it's a bit of an interesting paradox, because I think on one hand, if you're going to become a true omnichannel retailer, you better have a lot of smart data scientists and data analysts. You better have a lot of smart tech people and engineers that understand systems architecture and understand how to build those kind of tools and technology. And you better have some really good digital products folks that understand what is the fundamental problem we are trying to solve and how do you address that with a strong user experience, a strong user interface, et cetera. I won't say the exact proportion of tech and product folks that we have in SAMS, but let's just say it's very, very high in terms of what our corporate population is here. The irony of that is, and I think this is where, from a university perspective, and I want to be really clear before I say this, there is now and there will continue to be an incredible need for STEM skill sets. Having said that, what I actually think is going to be even more in need and more in demand moving forward is not the STEM skill set piece. If I just look at the way in the last 12 to 18 months of how much the tech is actually involved. I mean, the example I gave at the ASU GSB Summit of, 18 months ago, not a single person in Silicon Valley or in Stanford or in any Ivy League university was talking about ChatGPT. None, zero. And in 5 seconds, that is basically going to revolutionize the way we do work and all of the productivity involved, especially in organizations. So if you think about ChatGPT as that is a library of a repository of a lot of the knowledge we have, because those models basically, they remember and they predict. And that's what they're trained to do. So like a library is a perfect analogy. And you've got the librarian in there that's the smart kid in school. And once we figure out a way, or any company figures out a way to integrate the data and the knowledge that they have about their business into that library in a secure way, well, the world is yours, right? So that's why you need good product and good engineering folks. The paradox is that what I actually think we're going to need more of in terms of skill sets moving forward are people that have the ability to think critically, people that can think creatively and innovatively and have resilience and have the ability to influence and to lead others. Those are actually the skill sets that are going to be a lot harder to teach and train on. You can train anybody how to be a good engineer. You can train anybody what, different quant methods are and should be appropriately be applied. It's a lot harder to train somebody on how to be creative. It's a lot harder to train somebody on how to think critically. It's a lot harder to train somebody in terms of how to actually be a good leader. And in my opinion is the tech components become more and more commoditized over time, and it's going to take a little while, but they will become commoditized and integrated. What I think you're actually going to be left with is those skill sets that probably candidly a liberal arts college is going to be very, very well positioned to be able to do and to address. But it's going to be very interesting to see how all of those things kind of work and play out in the coming, I wouldn't even say years, but months even.
And then I think one other key phrase I heard you say in some of your other interviews was kind of 2 key words, which was storytelling and listening. And if you want to be a leader, those are 2 key attributes that you need to develop, which I don't think are typically developed in school. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk to those as to why they're so important.
So the listening piece for anyone, if you were brand new coming out of school, moving into a new company or a new role, you have a tremendous amount of capability, of knowledge, and of skills that you get coming out of that, whatever the university or whatever the school is. But the reality is you don't know anything about how to do the job, the way it's been done before, what people have tried, what's worked, what hasn't, what the culture's like, what the unwritten rules are, et cetera. So even in that concrete example, there's no replacement really for being curious. There's no replacement really for asking questions. There's no replacement really for kind of seeking that clarity. The second piece of that in terms of the storytelling component, I mean, I had to learn that hard lesson when I was in this analytics role where I tried to talk a lot in numbers and logic. And there is a place for numbers and there is a place for logic. There is also, I think, an even bigger place for anecdote, for example, and for story, to be able to bring these things to life and to be able to connect with how does the average person going to sit and think about this? And it's not always just based purely on logic and what does the math say. You better be able to turn that into something that people are going to be able to actually, not just to understand, but to digest and to then go operationalize. And you're right. I don't think that that's a great thing that universities probably excel at. I do think it's a thing that's really important. And the best news is it's something that you can learn through observed behavior. So almost almost every part of me that I have and apply in my job, I have seen that, I have observed that, I have learned that from someone that I have either worked for or worked with. So it's not an impossible thing to be able to get better at. So I wouldn't be too worried if you don't have that coming right out of school, that I'd be paying very close attention to who are those leaders that have a degree of charisma and kind of a compelling way of articulating a story and a vision.